Good morning everyone. We'll go to the third period of the topic respiration in higher plants. Yesterday we have seen the process of glycolysis, the 10 steps of glycolysis, which is also known as EMB pathway. Yes, where glucose is converted into pyruvic acid. So the very first common process between both aerobic and anaerobic respiration is the process of glycolysis, where the complex glucose molecule is converted into a simple 2 molecules of pyruvic acid. So here the glucose molecule undergo the process of glycolysis to form 2 molecules, which is a 3 carbon compound, to form the pyruvic acid, which is a 3 carbon compound. So the process of glycolysis is breakdown of the glucose molecule, a complex molecule of glucose, into pyruvic acid, or the stepwise breakdown of the glucose molecule into pyruvic acid is known as glycolysis. Now this pyruvic acid is subjected to both aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So when it can enter into, as we have seen, the major pathways by anaerobic respiration. So already we know that what is aerobic respiration? The respiration which utilizes oxygen for the oxidation of the respiratory substrates, or the process which utilizes oxygen for the breakdown of the food molecules is called as aerobic respiration. So if pyruvic acid enter into aerobic respiration, it forms carbon dioxide, water with release of 36 ATP molecules. So the pyruvic acid in aerobes, where they require oxygen for the oxidation process of the food substances, for the respiratory substrate to oxidize the respiratory substrates. If the process occurs in the presence of oxygen, then it enters to aerobic respiration with the formation of carbon dioxide, water, and release of 36 ATP molecules, that is nothing but 686 kilocalories of energy. But if it enters into anaerobic process, it can form ethyl alcohol with the release of carbon dioxide and 2 ATP molecules. So anaerobic respiration, it is the respiration which occurs in the absence of oxygen, where it is conducted. So in anaerobic respiration, there are 2 forms of respirations, or the process of fermentations, where it is alcoholic fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. So here this initial steps of the process of respiration, where the glucose is converted into pyruvic acid, and it is a common process for both aerobic and anaerobic processes. Again, the pyruvic acid is, if it is subjected, if it occurs in the aerobes where they use oxygen or utilize the oxygen for the breaking down of the food components or for the oxidation of the respiratory substrates, it releases 36 ATP molecules with the release of carbon dioxide and water. While in anaerobic, in the absence of oxygen, it leads to ethyl alcohol, carbon dioxide with the release of ATP, where it includes 2 fermentation process. One is known as alcoholic fermentation and the other is known as lactic acid fermentation. So what happens in alcoholic fermentation? As a part of anaerobic respiration, this process occurs in the absence of oxygen. Yes, it is in the absence of oxygen. Where alcoholic fermentation, in alcoholic fermentation, the process is, the first common process is glucose is converted into pyruvic acid. This is a common equation of the process of fermentation, that is the glycolysis. So in alcoholic fermentation, the common process is the glucose in the presence of the enzyme zymase produces ethyl alcohol with the release of carbon dioxide and 2 ATP molecules. This process occurs in the extracellular region of the yeast cells, especially the yeast fungi have a specific enzyme called as zymase, which converts the glucose into ethyl alcohol with the formation of ATP molecules. So what are the steps in alcohol fermentation? Yes, so here as it is a part of anaerobic respiration, the process occurs in the absence of the oxygen which is catalyzed by the enzyme zymase. So yeast have a particular enzyme called as zymase. So this zymase, first is the glucose, first common process is glycolysis, where glucose is converted into pyruvic acid, where NAD is reduced to form NADH2, and the adenosine triphosphate is also being formed, as we have seen in the process of glycolysis, that 4 ATP molecules and a molecule of NADH2 are being formed by the process of glycolysis. So in the first step of alcoholic fermentation, the glucose undergo glycolysis to form the pyruvic acid with the formation of NADH2 and ATP molecules. Then the pyruvic acid undergo decarboxylation process. This pyruvic acid, the product of glycolysis, it undergoes the decarboxylation process, or it undergo decarboxylation to form 2 molecules of acetaldehyde with the formation of carbon dioxide in the presence of the enzyme pyruvic decarboxylase. This enzyme is assisted, or it takes the help of TPP, that is thymine pyrophosphate, and the Mn plus ions to carry out the reactions. And here the pyruvic acid, which undergo decarboxylation, it get decarboxylated in the presence of the enzyme pyruvic decarboxylase to form 2 acetaldehyde with the release of carbon dioxide. So this is the second step in alcoholic fermentation. Then in the third step, the 2 acetaldehyde undergo dehydrogenation. Yes, it undergoes dehydrogenation in the presence of the enzyme alcoholic dehydrogenase. Yes, in the presence of the enzyme alcoholic dehydrogenase to form ethyl alcohol. So the end products of alcoholic fermentation are ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide. Now this fermentation process was first initially studied by Louis Pasteur, where long before also for the preparation of bread or curds, the process of fermentation is being used. Already we know the process of formation of curd, but here the alcoholic drinks like wine, beer and rum, which are widely used in the brewery industries, where the enzymes they are being added, or the alcoholic drinks that are being prepared in the industries undergo the process of fermentation. So this concept of fermentation was put forward by the scientist called as Louis Pasteur. Yes, so here the Louis Pasteur formulated the process of fermentation, and especially as an alcoholic fermentation, it occurs, there is absence of oxygen. So this process is occurring in the absence of the oxygen, where you can see that the glucose molecule is being broken down to simple components and many intermediate products are being formed. So glucose is converted into pyruvic acid. Pyruvic acid undergo decarboxylation to form acetaldehyde. So the intermediate product is 2-acetaldehyde. Then the acetaldehyde which undergo dehydrogenation to form ethyl alcohol. So here the two enzymes that are being used are pyruvic decarboxylase, which converts pyruvic acid into acetaldehyde, while here in the third step the enzyme that is being used is alcoholic dehydrogenase, which converts the acetaldehydes into ethyl alcohol. So these enzymes, apart from that, the enzyme zymase is accelerated, or it is catalyzing the overall reaction in the yeast cells, in the cytoplasm process, with the help of, and moreover the reactions are being supported by the other chemicals like TPP and manganese, thiamine pyrophosphate, with the help of the ion manganese ion in the reactions. And at last we get two molecules of pyruvic acid with the formation of two NADH molecules and two ATP molecules. Overall process of alcoholic fermentation is that the end products are, or we get two molecules of pyruvic acid, two molecules of NADH2 and two ATP molecules. So respiration is a process to digest the food components and release the energy. So the energy are being released as ATP and the NADPH, which are further used in the Krebs cycle and electron transport system in the further reactions of the respiration. So in alcoholic fermentation, as a part of anaerobic respiration, where zymase enzyme is involved in the process, the glucose is broken down to form ethyl alcohol, with the conclusion that it produces two molecules of pyruvic acid, two molecules of NADH2 and two molecules of ATP. So I just repeat the reactions. Alcoholic fermentation, what is that? The glucose common reaction is, the common equation for the alcoholic fermentation is glucose in the presence of the enzyme zymase form ethyl alcohol with the release of carbon dioxide and two ATP molecules, which is equivalent to 56 kilocalories of energy. This is the overall equation of alcoholic fermentation. What is the stepwise? So here the glucose is converted into pyruvic acid by the process of glycolysis with the reduction, where NAD is reduced to NADH2 and there is synthesis of ATP molecules. Pyruvic acid in the presence of pyruvic decarboxylase with the release of carbon dioxide. Then the acetaldehyde undergo dehydrogenation in the presence of the enzyme alcoholic dehydrogenase to form ethyl alcohol. Overall, we get 2 molecules of pyruvic acid, 2 molecules of NADH plus molecules and 2 ATP molecules with a formation of 56 kilocalories of energy. Then this process occurs in it is one of the biological process. Now what do you mean by biological process? If there is involvement of a living organism in the process, it is called as biological process. Now if you take photosynthesis, there is an involvement of a organ of a plant, that is leaf, in the process. So here there is an involvement of an organism. That process where living organisms are involved are known as biological process. Both are biological process. Here the organism that is being involved is the yeast. So this alcohol fermentation, by the fermentation process, as it is used in most of the malting industries or brewery industries for the formation of different type of alcoholic drinks. Then the next part of anaerobic respiration, which occurs in the bacteria, some fungi, and also in the muscle cells of higher group of animals, in the muscle cells of the animals. So here in lactic acid fermentation, the very first process is again glucose undergo the process of glycolysis to form the pyruvic acid. Then the pyruvic acid is directly reduced. It is directly reduced to form the lactic acid in the presence of the enzyme lactic acid dehydrogenase. Yes, so here the enzyme that activates the process is lactic acid dehydrogenase with the help of FMN and the zinc ions. Yes, flavin mononucleotide. FMN means what? Flavin mononucleotide, which helps the enzymes to carry out the reactions properly, or help the enzymes to carry the process easily or smoothly, where the pyruvic acid is converted into lactic acid. Now in simple example, if you take the bacteria, that is the curdling of the milk, where the milk contains the sugar known as lactose. This lactose, with the help of the bacteria lactobacillus, yes, that the lactose is converted into lactic acid, that is we get in the form of curds. The milk contains the sugar, that sugar is called as lactose. With the help of the bacteria, that is lactobacillus, it is converted into lactic acid that we get in the form of curds. Yes, while in some of the fungi also the process occurs, but there is no release of carbon dioxide. In lactic acid, there is no release of carbon dioxide, but if it is occurring in the muscle cells, of higher animals during the process of exercise or workout or any running, the lactic acid is being synthesized. If excess amount of lactic acid is being produced, it may lead to the muscle pains or the muscle cramps. Or if you might notice while playing, you get a catch in the muscles or the particular organ that we use, or during running or by exercising or pick up in the dumbbells or any heavy objects when you pick up. If that lactic acid concentration increases in the body, then it may lead to the muscle pain or muscle crabs. So in anaerobic respiration, the two processes are alcoholic fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. So alcoholic fermentation occurs in the yeast cells. So this zymates, it is such a type of enzyme which has a component to convert the glucose, break down the glucose to form the pyruvic acid with the assistant or with the reaction. And overall in alcoholic, why it is an important process, why it occurs in this process is that this process helps to produce the ATP molecules occurring in the cytoplasm. In the cells, it helps in the formation of ATP molecules. Then, if you go with aerobic and anaerobic respiration, so we have studied the anaerobic part. The common process is glycolysis. Then, next, what happens? After we will go with aerobic respiration, we have studied the anaerobic process, alcoholic fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. We will go with aerobic part of fermentation, or we will just see that what happens if pyruvic acid enters into aerobic process or aerobic respiration. So one part is over where we have got the end products of for anaerobic respiration as ethyl alcohol, and the other one is the lactic acid. So in the next class we will deal with the process what happens to the pyruvic acid. So in the next, after this anaerobic respiration, if it is the aerobic respiration. We have studied the anaerobic respiration part. Now we will deal with aerobic respiration process. So in aerobic respiration also, the glucose undergo the process of glycolysis to form the pyruvic acid. Now this process occurs in the cytoplasm. Then the pyruvic acid enters into the matrix of the mitochondria, where it enters to the cycle known as Krebs cycle, where there is a release of carbon dioxide, water, some amount of NADH2, FADH2, and formation of oxaloacetic acid and other components. So it enters the Krebs cycle from the cytoplasm into the mitochondrial matrix. Already we have studied the structure of the mitochondria, where the mitochondria has the two membrane, outer and inner membrane. So here in between the outer and inner membrane is the mitochondrial space, where the inner membrane has the infoldings in the form of crystalline. It has the inner foldings the form of creatine. Now the pyruvic acid which is produced in the cytoplasm will enter into the mitochondrial matrix. So, as a part of aerobic respiration, aerobic respiration, as defined earlier, it is a type of respiration which occurs in the presence of oxygen, where the food gets oxidized to release reasonable amount of energy, or the 36 ATP molecules, that is equivalent to 686 kilocalories of energy. So, in the animal cells or in aerobes, there is glucose is converted into pyruvic acid. That process is occurring in the cytoplasm. Now, the pyruvic acid from the cytoplasm enters into the mitochondrial matrix, and the process of Krebs cycle, also known as citric acid cycle or tricarboxylic acid cycle, occurs in the mitochondrial matrix. So there are 4 main steps in the aerobic respiration, and those steps are: first is the process of glycolysis. As I said earlier, that this process is common for both aerobic and anaerobic process. Then the second process is, here there is synthesis of ATP molecules with the oxidation. So this process is also called as oxidative phosphorylation. So we know what is phosphorylation. That is synthesis of ATP molecules is known as phosphorylation. Yes, but here this process, there is synthesis of ATP molecules in the presence of oxygen, or there is oxidative process. That process of synthesis is called as oxidative phosphorylation. So in this aerobic respiration, there are 4 steps. That is the process of glycolysis, then it is the next step is electron transport system, then terminal oxidation. So glycolysis, then Krebs cycle, followed by terminal oxidation, which then electron transport system, followed by terminal oxidation. So in whole of this aerobic respiration is defined as oxidative process of or oxidative breakdown of the food particles or respiratory substrate to release considerable amount of energy, where it includes the 4 steps: glycolysis, Krebs cycle, electron transport system, and terminal oxidation, which are interlinked with the process. While glycolysis is conversion of glucose into pyruvic acid, then the pyruvic acid which enters into the mitochondrial matrix. In the matrix, the Krebs cycle occurs. Then the energy, that is NADH and FADH, that are being released by the Krebs cycle is used in the transport of electrons, which helps to release the water. Then lastly, with the help of oxygen, there is synthesis of ATP molecules, which is known as terminal oxidation. So in the next class, after the glycolysis, the pyruvic acid enters the Krebs cycle. We will deal in the next class with the Krebs cycle. And today's questions are: what is anaerobic respiration? Which are the components of anaerobic respiration? That is the 2 marks question. Or explain the process of fermentation reaction. That is the 5 marks question. Or it can also be asked as explain alcoholic fermentation for 3 marks and lactic acid fermentation for 2 marks. Yes. Now, I just forgot to say about that. Totally, the alcoholic fermentation. In alcoholic fermentation, the process will continue until 10 to 15% of alcohol is being formed. Yes. After that, the yeast cells will die. So there is formation of, or the yeast can survive only up to 13% of alcohol is formed. But the production of ATP molecules is only 7% in an anaerobic process. So in the next class we will deal with aerobic respiration. Common process is glycolysis. Already the 10 steps we have studied. Now the pyruvic acid that has been synthesized in the cytoplasm enters the Krebs cycle, or we call it as TCA cycle, or we call it as citric acid cycle, where the ATP molecules NADP and FADH are being released. So in the next class we will go with the Krebs cycle, electron transport system and terminal oxidation, and the last component is the respiratory substrate. And in this respiration, why it is called as anaerobic process? It is called as amphibolic process. Why it is called as an amphibolic process? So remember, in aerobic respiration there are 4 steps, where after each steps. So while the pyruvic acid forms the connecting link, it is a connecting link between the glycolysis and the Krebs cycle. The products of the Krebs cycle are citric acid, alpha ketogluteric acid, the succinic acid, malic acid and oxaloacetic acid. Various intermediate compounds are being involved in the process, which ultimately leads to the production of ATP molecules, and those molecules, with the help of electron carriers, help in the formation of water molecules and oxygen molecules. This oxygen molecule or the protons that are being released are used up by ATP synthetase molecule for the synthesis of ATP. So in the next class we will deal with aerobic respiration, that is Krebs cycle. After Krebs cycle we will deal with electron transport system and terminal oxidation. Thank you.